The prairie wind carried with it the scent of dust, sweat, and survival, brushing across the endless fields where silence spoke louder than words, and the golden sunset seemed to hold every broken dream in its fading light. She leaned against the rough bark of a tree, her face streaked with blood and tears, her breathing uneven, her dress torn where thorns and hardship had left their marks. Her eyes, though filled with pain, carried a stubborn fire, a refusal to be broken by the world that had already taken so much from her. "It hurts too much," she whispered, her voice trembling, not just from the wound on her arm but from the years of loneliness, of battles fought in silence, of carrying burdens no one had cared enough to share. The cowboy knelt in front of her, his wide-brimmed hat tilted low, his calloused hands steady as he pressed cloth to her wound. Dust clung to his boots, his shirt damp with sweat from the long ride, but his gaze never wavered, steady, strong, unshaken. "That's why I'm here," he said, his voice deep and grounding, like the earth itself had spoken, a promise carved into the open sky. She turned her eyes to him, searching, as if trying to find truth in a world that had always lied. And for the first time in a long time, she saw someone who wasn't going to leave. He worked with patience, wrapping her arm as gently as if she were made of glass, yet with a firmness that reminded her she was still alive, still here, still worth saving. The pain etched across her face softened as his presence steadied her, and for a moment, she forgot the blood, the brokenness, the past, because all she could feel was the quiet strength of the man who refused to walk away. The cowboy wasn't a man of many words. He was carved from the dust and the storms, a life of long rides and harder nights written in the lines of his face. But in his silence lived a loyalty deeper than any vow, a heart that carried the weight of promises never spoken. She tried to push him away at first, whispering that she wasn't worth the trouble, that too many scars already marked her soul. But he only shook his head, tightening the bandage, anchoring her trembling hands with his own. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly, and the words cut through the walls she had built, crumbling them one by one. Her chest tightened as tears she had buried for years threatened to break free, and when she finally let them fall, he didn't look away, didn't flinch, didn't shame her for the flood of weakness. He simply held her steady, the warmth of his presence grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in forever. The prairie night was creeping in, shadows stretching long across the fields, but he stayed by her side, lighting a small fire, keeping her close to its glow. She watched him move, strong and deliberate, every gesture carrying the weight of a man who knew what it meant to protect, to care, to stand when others ran. He spoke of the land, of the stars that would soon scatter across the sky, of a tomorrow that still held hope if she'd let herself believe it. And slowly, painfully, she did. Her wounds hurt, her body weak, but something deeper inside her began to heal, not from bandages, not from firelight, but from knowing she no longer had to face the storms alone. When she closed her eyes, her head resting against the rough bark once more, she felt his hand resting lightly over hers, not trapping, not forcing, but promising. And for the first time in years, sleep came without fear. The cowboy sat there through the night, his gaze steady on the horizon, guarding her like a promise he intended to keep, his whispered words lingering in the air. "That's why I'm here." And dear listener, if you felt the pull of this story, if you found yourself riding through the dust and firelight with them, don't let it end here. Join this journey. Let your heart follow more stories of courage, healing, and love that refuses to break. Subscribe to the channel, because every story has another chapter, and you don't want to miss the one where pain becomes strength and strangers become family. The first rays of dawn spread slowly across the horizon, painting the prairie in strokes of gold and fire, and with them came a silence that felt heavier than the night before. She stirred where she sat against the tree, her arm bound neatly in the cowboy's careful work, the pain still sharp but no longer bleeding. Her eyes blinked open, weary, and for a moment, she thought it had all been a dream, a trick of her desperate mind. But then she saw him. He sat a few feet away, his back against a rock, hat tipped low, rifle resting across his lap, though his eyes were wide awake, scanning the land as if every shadow might hold a threat. He hadn't slept. She felt her throat tighten, not from pain but from something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. He turned his head when he noticed her waking, and for just a heartbeat, his stern face softened into something she could almost mistake for tenderness. "Morning," he said simply, his voice low, steady, like the earth itself greeting her. Her lips parted to answer, but all that came out was a whisper. "Why are you still here?" She expected him to shrug, to say it was nothing, to dismiss her the way men always had, but he didn't. He set the rifle aside, leaned forward with those steady hands of his resting on his knees, and said, "Because you're not ready to be alone again. Not yet." The words struck her deeper than any wound could, because they spoke to the ache she carried, the one no one had ever seen, the one that whispered she wasn't worth saving. She turned her face away, embarrassed by the tears threatening to spill, but he reached out, catching her chin with the gentlest touch, guiding her eyes back to his. "Don't hide," he said, voice rough like gravel, yet warm as sunlight. "Scars don't make you weak. They prove you survived." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe. But memories clawed at her, the betrayal, the nights of running, the faces she'd lost, and she shook her head, whispering, "I don't think I can keep going." His jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing, just studying her like he could see every ghost behind her eyes. Then, slowly, firmly, he said, "Then I'll walk beside you until you can." The day passed slow and steady, the cowboy keeping her close, guiding her through the plains, though she could barely manage a few steps without stumbling. He never let her fall. When she faltered, he lifted her. When she trembled, he steadied her. When she broke down, whispering that she couldn't take the pain anymore, he was there with those same four words that seemed to carry her farther than her legs could. "That's why I'm here." He taught her how to lean on him without shame, how to let another bear the weight when her strength faltered. And though her body still hurt, though her heart still bled, she began to feel something stirring, a flicker of hope, faint but alive. By nightfall, they reached the edge of a small stream, water glinting in the fading light. He built another fire, this time letting her sit close, the heat warming the chill that had settled in her bones. She watched him move, the firelight catching the edges of his face, painting him in gold and shadow, and she wondered who he really was beneath the rugged exterior. A man who carried his own ghosts, surely, but one who chose to fight them by saving others. When he caught her staring, she quickly turned away, but he only gave a small smile, the kind that said he wasn't used to smiling, but found it fit when she was around. Later, as the stars began to scatter across the sky, she spoke softly, almost to herself. "I don't even know your name." He glanced at her, the fire reflecting in his eyes, then said simply, "Call me whatever helps you feel safe." It wasn't the answer she expected, but somehow it felt right. He wasn't here to give her names or promises that faded with the wind. He was here to be what she needed, for as long as she needed it. And that, she realized, was more powerful than any name could ever be. That night, she lay by the fire, his coat draped over her shoulders, the scent of leather and dust wrapping around her like a shield. She whispered into the flames, "It still hurts." He looked at her, eyes steady, and said the words she had begun to cling to like lifelines. "That's why I'm here." And as sleep pulled her under, she allowed herself, just for a moment, to believe that maybe, just maybe, he really was that so. Dear listener, if you felt her pain, if you walked beside her in the dust and firelight, if those words touched something inside you that you've kept hidden, remember, you don't have to carry your story alone either. Subscribe to this channel, because every chapter brings healing, every tale carries hope, and together, we can ride further than the pain ever thought possible.